I am going to record this so that you guys have a reference for later on. So, alright, SolidWorks, Keyshot, class, you guys have done a lot of stuff. Most recently, we've been working on an assignment called Custom Fit, where you guys were designing some sort of clothing or protective gear or device that was made to fit a 3D scan of your body. And so I'm going to use something that's pretty close to that in this demo. This is the Neutrogena Light Therapy Acne Mask. And for those of you who remember from last semester, this is something that my wife helped design where she works. It was under a different brand. This is the brand that it's under now. And it's a mask that fits on your face. And I guess, all right, it's attached to a remote too. But, right, so, oh, there we go. Right, yeah, test fit it over my glasses. There you go. There you go. Yeah, that's it. So it is designed to fit more than just like one person's specific face, but it is something that they use surface modeling to design. It's got a couple different components, so this is what I'm going to use for this rendering demo. The purpose of this demo is to kind of review a bunch of stuff that we've talked about in the past, and then I'm going to add on a few extra little go-to tips and tricks to make a rendering stand out after you're done rendering. So we call that post-processing stuff. I'm going to actually walk you through the entire process cold of like, so you have your 3D model from SolidWorks or whatever else, and you've dropped it into Keyshot with nothing else. So I'm going to just kind of go through my workflow. This is not something I've like pre-designed or set anything up ahead of time, so you'll kind of see what it actually looks like when I go through this process. I hopefully will hit things like settings in Keyshot that are commonly missed or things that you'll want to adjust as you're doing lighting. We're going to hit some lighting stuff, we're going to hit some material stuff and some background stuff. Eventually we're going to render this thing in its materials. We're also going to render it in a clown pass, a clay pass, and a chrome pass. I'll show you guys how to set those different passes up as scene sets inside Keyshot using a shared camera so that you can use multiple renders, different layers after the fact in Photoshop to change things like how shiny your model is, how bright, colors. You can add materials and graphics and stuff like that later too. So, any questions before we start? If you guys, I might as well just like pass that over. Is this expensive? I don't know how much that retails for. The price might be on there, or that might be a sample. Oh yeah, so what is the mask about? Again, that's not really why we're modeling it, but it uses a couple wavelengths of light to treat acne, and I think it helps like kill the bacteria or something. I'm sure it's on the box. But it's a cool model of something. Okay, so this is the model exactly how it was imported to Keyshot, and I actually did assign very basic materials really quick because you guys already know how to do that, just drag and drop. I haven't done anything with lighting yet, or where the model is on the page. Right now I'm just using a basic shiny plastic for all of the white parts and a see-through like colored plastic for the orange parts. Alright, one important note. So this is a shiny white thing, and that's like one of the hardest things to render so that you can still have pixels to play with after the fact. First tip, if I click on the color, like the plastic, I'm not actually using white plastic. I'm using gray plastic. It's a lot easier to, in Photoshop, brighten up a gray color than it is to try and make up, you know, washed out pixels that were rendered in white. I might end up having to darken this up even further. So, alright, so one thing I'm going to change really quick, the color of the lenses. Can you hold that up for me really quick just so I can see? Okay, it's a lot lighter. They're not quite as like dark yellow as this. So this is just like the standard plastic material. Where is it? Like clear plastic material, and I picked some kind of yellow to start. So I'm in the material, I can change the color. It looks like it's a little bit more orange. And it's also a whole lot lighter than that. So I might just like scale that back to be a little bit lighter. It's always nice if you have a physical reference, but you don't always have a physical reference of a material, or you might not even have the object you're designing in front of you. If you can find an actual physical material reference that you can look at, even if it's not, you know, an Illu mask or whatever this thing is called, Acne Mask, it will help you get that material to look correct. Alright, so I tweaked the color, I'm happy with that.
Can you go back to the color?
Oh yeah, sure.
What's the difference between diffuse transmission and specular?
Sure. So the question was, what's the difference between specular transmission and diffuse transmission? Those are two different qualities to the material, and they affect light differently. In general, diffuse transmission has to do with translucency, and the best way that you can learn what those things do is just mess around with them in Keyshot, like make it brighter, make it darker.
I didn't really know like which one to use.
Yeah, for the most part, for clear plastics, in order to change the color and intensity of that color, I would do it all in specular transmission. Don't worry about diffuse transmission. This will make the material look cloudier or less cloudy, and will usually also make the rendering time like way more if you like mess with it too much. Okay. I mean, you can sort of combine these in ways that maybe they were not originally intended, and that's fine too. It's really just something for you to play around with. My workflow is usually pick something close and then change the color, rather than like start with something from scratch and then tweak a million things to get it to look right. All right, I'm gonna keep moving. Does that kind of answer your question though? Yeah. Okay. All right, next thing I want to do while I'm looking at this, so my mask is sitting like directly on the ground. Another thing I usually do right off the bat is before I make a whole bunch of scene sets, is kind of move my object off the ground a little bit. I've noticed that sometimes in models that you guys have presented, it's easy to have part of the model sit below the ground plane, and then you get some weird reflections and shadows and stuff. I always like to move my model up just a little bit. Another thing I might do, and I'm trying to think of what view I want to render this in. I actually think like this view is more interesting, kind of seeing like part of the outside and part of the inside of this. I might actually just rotate this up a little bit, because I think it's going to help it catch the light a little bit better. Alright, so one other thing you'll notice, there's global and local movement. Global will ignore any sort of like rotation you've already put on your model, and it'll let you move in the cardinal directions, up, down, left, and right, forward and backward. Local stuff, and maybe Luke, when you were talking about moving your vest around, if you had used a local rotation, it might be a little bit easier. You can see like my local rotation already shows that this mask is tipped slightly, or maybe not, depends on how your model came in. Okay. Another thing I'm going to do, I usually do this at some point early on, is I check my lighting, and actually the product defaults these days are pretty good. The lighting presets, basically it increases your ray bounces a little bit, and it also adds an indirect bounce. Those things will allow this lens to actually look correct. Usually clear materials, you need a couple more ray bounces in order for things behind that plastic to look like they're rendering correctly. I make sure that global illumination is on. Again, that helps light pass through transparent materials. And I generally keep ground illumination off, and I keep caustics off. Caustics have to do with like focusing light through a piece of glass. If you're rendering like wine glasses or like optical things, you'd want to have that on. In this case, it's not going to make a big difference. Alright, I'm also going to look at the... I think now I want to start messing around with lighting. So once I have my materials and I have my model like roughly where I want it to be, I think this is kind of the angle I want to render it in, something like that. I think that's kind of interesting. I'm going to start messing around with lighting. So usually I build my lighting from scratch, and I know you guys have done this a little bit. And usually I start with either a completely blank background or one of these gradients. I like this black floor gradient because we have just a little bit of light coming in from the top of my HDRI scene, and it helps me, one, like see everything in this view, and two, gives me sort of like a baseline of volume on all of these materials. Things we're missing from this, obviously it's underlit. We can't really tell that anything's shiny, and so we're going to have to add a few lights to this to make it interesting. So I'm going to go to my environment tab over here and double click, and right away I'm going to do a save as, so I don't overwrite my black floor gradient here. I think I usually start a, hold on, let me get out of here. Oh my gosh, save as. Usually I start a custom folder somewhere in here. It looks like I don't have one. I would suggest starting a folder somewhere within your Keyshot directory that's like custom lighting, so you can find the stuff that you do. I'm just going to write this like custom Acne Mask demo. And now when I save this, it's not going to write over one of the Keyshot defaults. Alright, so this is a process that it's nice if you have like another monitor, because I might have to like do this a bunch. That's okay. So I'm going to go to pins, and I'm going to just start adding some pins. And there are, remember, a couple ways that you can add a pin. Usually I start with some sort of light up top, and I might actually like move this light around a little bit and try to see where the front of the lighting is on this object. Let's see if we can find. Alright, that looks like it's sort of hitting here. Okay, and we're getting a couple reflections. So if I want light kind of hitting the top of that, notice how my light is kind of like moving on top of these temples, and I'm getting a better highlight sort of on the top of this ridge. Okay, I think that is kind of working. It's also giving me sort of like a shadow on the outside here, and this edge is looking pretty nice. So again, when I'm lighting things, I'm kind of looking at edges and transitional areas to see how they appear. Another thing I usually end up doing is start with a bigger light. So I might bump up the size of this light significantly. This is sort of like our big fill light. And I will also generally increase the brightness of my main light to something like 3. That's sort of an arbitrary brightness that I found works. I don't know, it's something you can play with after the fact. Okay, so I'm starting to get there. I don't need to fine tune it just yet. Alright, it looks like I'm going to want some light kind of bouncing around the back here too. So I'm going to add another pin. Okay, come on. Alright, so we'll add another one. Yeah, so see that highlight here that's appearing? I want that because I know the front of my mask is very shiny. Yeah, that actually looks pretty close. And it looks like I'm also getting like a tiny bit of dark on the edge too. Now, at this point, I always remember, I'm going to save this. Remember, I already made a name for it. I always get distracted by like lights moving around in the background. So now's a good time to, in your environment tab, change so that we're not seeing the lighting, we're just seeing a background color. And in general, I like to use kind of like a very light gray because it allows me to see like where my hottest highlights are, and I can still see dark edges. So I don't know if you guys can tell that like really fine line around the front of this. I think maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger. So again, talking about workflow, usually I play around with lighting a little bit, and I'm looking for perfection. Okay, at this point, I might actually change this. So because this surface is it's round in one direction, but it's relatively straight up and down. I might have better luck with this highlight if I change the shape of it. So instead of making it a circle, I'll make it rectangular. And I'm going to mess with the size. I'm going to make it a little bit taller. I'm going to make it a little bit narrower and see what that does. I think it's going to give me, yeah, see, it like made that highlight a little narrower. And it gives me a little more leeway moving this thing up and down. Alright. I kind of want it like right there. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. I might change this a little more. So another thing you can mess with is something called fall off. And that's, I'll show you. Like if I change this to 0.5, it kind of blurs the edges of this light. It's like it has a diffuser in front of it. And actually, I kind of want that to stay like a hard highlight. So I might go back to 0.1 there. Yeah, that's fine. And again, I'm going to up the brightness significantly, and maybe that's a little too bright. That highlight was a little, like maybe too intense. Okay. All right, you guys like starting to get the workflow a little bit. If this is similar to what you're doing it the way that I do it. If it's something you've never seen before, this is how I do it. There's, again, as you get used to rendering certain things, certain shapes, you'll probably find different types of lights that work better or give you a better, stronger baseline. But usually it's just kind of playing around with this a little bit. All right, so one thing I don't like about this light is how I'm getting some like interesting, bad, interesting kind of like reflections here. This is shiny plastic, but I'm not sure I want that to be defining those like hard lines. So I'm gonna give this a little bit of fall off to kind of soften that, and we'll see it as it reses up if it's a little bit softer. Alright, I'm definitely missing some light on like these outside temples, so I'm gonna add another light. And this time I'll show you another way that you can do things. You can add a highlight. So it brings you back to your rendering, and you can pick, like literally put your mouse and click on part of your model where you want to add the highlight, and then if you like it, you can say done. And where did that window go? That's where, see, it like magically put this light right here, and it gave me this like nice highlight sort of following this temple. So to maybe emphasize it and see what it's doing a little bit more, I'm going to again like increase its brightness. Yeah, actually I kind of like that because it's showing sort of this surface transitioning, and it looks like it's nice and bright, or nice and shiny. Okay, I'm not really like losing any pixels either. Like this looks pretty gray still, but again, this is something I might end up like bringing up further in Photoshop. The real mask looks a little bit whiter. This still looks kind of gray to me. Let's see. I also kind of like how we're getting a pretty hard shadow in between like this front panel and the back panel. These shadows are looking pretty nice to me. Like you can tell that there's an offset there. We are getting sort of like a reflected, I guess not really reflected, but we're seeing some of the yellow on the plastic here. Alright, I think we're getting pretty close. I'm going to add one more light and kind of see if there are any edges that look really good if they are called out. So I'm going to actually increase the brightness of this significantly and then just move it around and see what happens. So like, alright, so there we're getting like a nice highlight on the top of this temple, but it's kind of blowing out the top of that side. So let's move it around a little more. Over here, I do like that it puts this a little bit more in the focus, and actually we're not blowing out the top so much anymore here, and we're getting a cool highlight on the top of this top corner. And we're still keeping some nice shadows underneath this surface. Actually, this is reading really well now. I think I kind of like what that's doing. It also put a highlight on this corner that wasn't there before. Yeah, so again, talking about workflow, sometimes you don't know what's going to look good until you mess around and like see a different area of your model highlighted. A good way to do that, make a little point light really bright and just move it around until you start to see stuff highlighted or low lighted. Not everything is going to look better. And if you can't tell, keep moving stuff around and try it out. After you've done a lot of renderings, you'll start to get an intuition about what looks good. And it's easy to add like too many lights to a scene and make everything kind of bright and shiny. It's good to have like a core shadow, one of those things we talked about back in sketching class. So looking at my HDRI here, I have a sort of a cluster of lights in one area and kind of a dark in another area, so that should give me on my model brighter areas and a darker area. It's another kind of like check that you can make. In this case, the front of my mask is pretty bright. The inside here looks like it's mostly in shadow, but it's giving me a nice contrast between this leading edge and the inside. I think this is looking pretty close. So I'm going to say this is my lighting scheme for now. I'm going to save it one more time. Did I save it? Yeah, I guess so. Okay. And then I'm also going to save my Keyshot file. Alright, now that I have my lighting the way I like it, and my materials are pretty much the way I like them, I'm going to start messing with the camera. So I think I'm pretty close with this camera. This is about the angle that I wanted, and I did all my lighting based on that camera, so if I move too much, I'm going to lose it. You know, I'm kind of seeing, this looks like it's even more blown out than it was. Can I like... I might go back into my environment really quick and just turn down that... Oh yeah, I left this at 5. Turn that down a little bit. Okay, see how it brought a little bit more color back into this highlight? I think that's good. And I might add some fall off to that too. Another thing that you can do, like if you have one lighting setup you like and you want to keep messing with it, save a copy, save a version, so you can always go back to something that you knew was starting to work well and try again. Okay, camera stuff. This view looks pretty good to me. Normally, you'd want to set up or think about like multiple views. In this case, I'm just going to do the one so we can get into like other post-processing stuff that we're interested in. One thing I generally try to take a look at is the focal length, which is essentially changing how much perspective is perceived. It relates to the focal length of a camera lens. In general, higher focal length gives you almost like an orthographic view of your product. And sometimes that's what you want. It gives you like a fairer look at, I'd say, like proportions. If you're doing a side view of a shoe, for example, you'd probably want to use a pretty long focal length. In this case, I don't think it's doing us any favors to have it this far out. Yeah, this makes it look a little rounder. And normally when you interact with this object in real life, it's up near your face, so you're kind of seeing more extreme perspective that way anyway. So actually 35 looks pretty good to me. I like how it keeps this arm sort of above where the glasses are. So I might just leave that. You can mess with field of view. I'm not going to do that in this demo. I'm actually pretty happy with that right now. Alright, we did lighting stuff, environment. Yeah, materials are fine. Alright, so I'm going to save this. Okay, so, oh yeah, that's right. Once we have a camera that we like, add a new camera and call it whatever. camera we like. So this is our first view. Once you save it, I would lock it so that even if you click and drag, you're not going to mess up what you're seeing here. The other reason that adding a camera of a known view is important is for what we're going to do next. We're going to do something with scene sets. So I've mentioned that we're going to use something called a clay pass, a chrome pass. We've done this a little bit before. I'm going to actually add a new scene set, and sure, we'll call it like clay pass. I'm going to use the same camera that we like and say OK, and it made a new scene set. So now any changes I make in this scene set to the materials are not going to affect our first pass, like the full rendering. That's where we were working. Alright, so for a chrome pass, you guys remember, just use some sort of shiny metal. Oh, for a clay pass, use some sort of hard, rough plastic. And in general, I like to make sure it appears on the screen as sort of like a neutral gray. So we're going to, it's matte, so nothing's going to appear really shiny. All of our like lighting is going to be rather diffused on the surface of this object. And let's see here. Now that I've changed that material, I'm going to copy it and just paste it onto all of the other parts of this. The other way you could do this is paste it into all of these different areas on the scene. So like, alright, I could right click and paste the material here too. So if you're having trouble like finding and clicking on things. What is that? Okay, that's everything that's visible. I might actually, for the clay pass, just turn that off. Another thing that your scene set will keep track of are like what things are visible or not visible. Alright, so let's check it. If I go back to my first pass, I still have all of my materials. If I click on my clay pass, the shield is hidden and everything has those new clay materials. And again, I'm looking for, like, none of this is washed out, none of it is super black, except for maybe inside here. All of it looks pretty, like, soft and matte. That's good. Alright, the next pass that we're going to do is a chrome pass. We're going to use that camera we like. And then in chrome pass, really you can use any just, like, shiny polished metal. Chrome is a good choice. Where's just like a regular old chrome, basic chrome, okay. Just kidding. Wow, that's pretty crazy. So one thing you'll notice with Chrome Pass is there are a lot of reflections that you would never see in, especially if you have a part that would reflect in on itself. These reflections, like, we would probably never really see in that shiny white plastic, but they're there, kind of. So I'm still going to render this because how these temples look might be helpful, like to get some highlights, use some of these highlights. Okay, that's fine. I am going to leave those, like the glasses off for now, too. Because they're transparent, I'm not as interested in what they look like. Although now I'm kind of interested in what they look like, whatever. Alright, so that's Chrome Pass, Clay Pass, our Color Pass, or like our first pass. And they all, notice, like, have exactly the same camera. Alright, so I'm going to save. Any questions up to here on, like, what we're doing? Okay, this is very similar, I'm sure, to what you guys are doing. Notice we haven't really gone into, like, tweaking textures or adding labels or anything like that. We've covered those other times, and that's kind of a little bit past what we're going to do here, because in this workflow, those things like adding textures or graphics, we can actually do in Photoshop using some of these other things as layers. Okay, so now we get a render. What are my go-to render settings? Well, first things first, pick a folder that this should go in. Actually, I'll leave it in the renderings folder. That's fine. Or maybe I'll throw it on the desktop. Or maybe I'll throw it in my project folder. Sure, OSU stuff. There we go. Okay, how do we want to render it? I like to render in Photoshop. Photoshop's file type, because we're going to do stuff with it in Photoshop afterwards, and Photoshop does a pretty good job with compression. What size? In general, anything less than 1280 is kind of too small to really like play around with the pixels. We'll see how long this takes, because more pixels are better. Actually, you know what? I might try like the next level up, 1920. And in general, for on-screen stuff, I like to do this at 150 DPI. It still prints well, but it gives you, I mean, that's something you can change after the fact too. So that's kind of like my go-to settings. When we're yeah, it's really all that matters is how many pixels there are. The DPI is kind of like how it's mapping pixels per inch. If you have 1920 by 1200 pixels, you can change it to 300 DPI or 72 DPI without it resampling the image at all. 150 is a nice happy medium, so you can edit it on a screen, you can kind of zoom in and change things, and it will still print pretty well. Alright, so Clown Pass, we are going to do a Clown Pass with all of our renderings, and you'll see what that looks like here in a minute. We're not doing anything with animation or regions. Options, in general, I like to do advanced control. Always turn off global illumination cache, because it's evil. How many samples? This is all probably fine for this demo. What I'm looking for, like, make sure your ray bounces are up high enough so that it matches at least what you're seeing in your viewfinder, like this area, and they were at 10. Okay, so that's fine. We're not going to add it. Actually, we could add it to the queue. I'm going to get out of here and save one more time, because it will save those rendering settings. One other thing that I'm going to check. So in order to make sure my Clown Pass works the way I want it to, in this scene set, I'm going to right click and unlink all of the materials in this pass. Linked materials are helpful when you're trying to apply like the same material to a bunch of parts and then change the properties of one of those materials and have that propagate over all of the linked parts. That's fine if you set up your file that way. To do a good clay pass, all of the parts that are linked in materials will also appear as the exact same color in your Clown Pass. So in order to make sure they appear as different colors, either like make a copy of your model and unlink everything, or just unlink everything. And you'll see what that looks like here in a second too. So I think we're good here. So I'm gonna let this thing render. Or actually, just kidding. One more thing. I'm going to, where is it? Oh, okay, so when you go to do your rendering, you could just say render, let the thing churn out your rendering, go back and render the clay pass, and do the same thing for the chrome pass. Or, if you're using the queue, you can actually add all the scene sets, or any number of scene sets, to this queue. I don't want to render the default one. I'm going to do the chrome pass, clay pass, first pass, all of those scene sets. I will add them to my queue. So it takes all of those settings, queues them all up, and then you can walk away from your computer and let it churn through all of those things. So process queue, and we'll see how long this looks like it's going to take. Chrome pass always takes almost no time at all. For some reason, it's very easy for Keyshot to deal with Chrome. Alright, clay pass usually takes a little bit longer.
When I tried doing a queue for my renders, I was trying to make like a high resolution, and I had all my queue like set up and I did process. It would immediately take everything and render at the lowest quality, and I couldn't like change it to make it the quality I wanted. I don't know if that was like the settings or.
usually the setting that the queue takes is the most recent setting in your your rendering window. It should pull from that. And if it's not for some reason, I don't know what it would be without looking at it and poking it a little bit. All right, it looks like it's rendering pretty well. So I'm just gonna let this churn. We're gonna take a quick, well, whatever, break the video. I'll fast forward this part in the video and it'll just be like, yeah. You'll see. Yeah. So I've been talking like you guys know what I'm talking about because we did some stuff with that last semester. We're going to put all of these layers together in Photoshop, and then we can actually use the clay pass and the chrome pass to as adjustment layers on top of our original rendering to do all sorts of stuff. We can use it to mask off textures. We can use it to brighten up or make more apparent the volume of an object. This clay pass does a really good job of making sure all the surfaces read really well because all the light is nice and diffused. So we can actually bring that into the color version of our rendering. The chrome pass basically just emphasizes all of the shiny parts of our model. So if we're going to try and airbrush in more shiny highlights, we have a reference, or we can actually use that chrome pass as an adjustment layer to bring up the the brightness of all those highlights. And I'll show you kind of how that works when we get into Photoshop. Yeah. And then this chrome pass thing, or I'm sorry, the clown pass thing I keep talking about is that little box that we checked. It will render all of the parts in this model as just a flat color. No depth or anything. It'll just look like red or green. And we use that to select different areas in Photoshop. So anyway, we'll walk through that. I'm debating whether I should kill it now and go one less resolution or just let it go. It's at 9, but most of the stuff to render is in that middle 25%. So just let it go. Okay. So I don't how much of this stuff is what you guys already do? I know most of it's review, but or I know you asked about lighting. Was it helpful learning a little bit more of the process? Okay. There are a couple other really cool things you can do with lighting if you use emissive objects as opposed to using the HDRI editor. Maybe someday I can do a video on that too. I think Keyshot has a cool video on that. Because you can, alright, if this goes over your head, that's fine, but if you use emissive objects, you can render each object as its own pass in an output channel and then bring those in as raw files into Photoshop, and then after the fact, whatever that means, after the fact, in Photoshop you can actually change the brightness of independent light sources. So if you know you want a hot side and a cool side of an object, but you don't want to spend all of your time in Keyshot figuring out how hot or cool it should be, you just render it and then mess around with it in Photoshop afterwards. It's also a really cool way to, let's say you render an object with 2 lights, and you spend a bunch of time in Photoshop adjusting things, and you're crap, I really wish I had another light over here. You can go back, render your scene with just that light on, bring that in as an alpha channel, and then turn the light on in Photoshop. You can do some really sophisticated stuff that way, but that's if you have a week to spend on a single rendering. So yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Probably.
It won't like mess up your sometimes that's all.
Dude, there's so much more. You probably have like, you probably have like established artists. You probably have like not even.
Yeah, I feel like
Oh boy, that one's
if we don't need it, like this.
Yeah, time for a treatment session. It works. They went through the whole like FTA process and had to like prove it through medical trials that it actually does something.
I saw it. Wait.
Did you?
Yeah. Wait, did
Was
you
this?
try it?
Like when they first came out, there was like this whole social media thing, and like everyone on Instagram was like putting pictures of them with like the
Yeah, they look
around it. Yeah, dude.
I have one of those pink teeth things.
What's that?
Have you seen the teeth ones on
No.
Instagram? It's like the same concept when you put it in your mouth, it like snaps your teeth and makes them white. Not anymore.
It's kind of weird. It's a weird one.
I don't know. Yeah, that's, I don't know.
I know they did like their team did a ton of
I like
ergonomic study on like how these glasses were supposed to be, and like they're really flexible so that you have a wide head, match your ears
I'm actually really
together.
impressed it didn't seem to fall down on my face.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I had glasses like never worked on me, like safety glasses especially because like I have nose bridge.
Okay. Oh, you just have like a lower nose bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy how narrow glasses are. Like there's so many different face types, and even like brothers can have like twins with the same DNA can have vastly different face structures just based on like age and weight and stuff like that too. I think it has something to do with the fact that like whatever wavelengths of light is like red light and blue light, it's nothing special naturally for bacteria.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, they
it's
say like tanning is supposed to be good for acne.
It is.
it's the same idea. I think the difference is like you could have the same effect with really strong white lights because white light has blue light and red light in it too, but it's a waste of energy. So they did like just blue and just red. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I still have the option. No, it's not UV.
Oh, it's UV-free.
Yeah, there's no UV. Yeah, that would be bad. I don't think you want to
I was like,
beam UV light directly into your face.
Go right now.
I'm just wearing sunscreen now.
Yeah.
Okay, who's playing that video on repeat?
Oh, we're looking it up to see. We're seeing who made the EDM version of it.
Oh,
trying to
honestly,
what?
the EDM version is actually
It's
a
good.
banger.
It's on SoundCloud.
It's good, yeah.
Of what?
There's the yodeling kid at Walmart.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
Have you
and I've seen the
seen
EDM version. Yeah, I've
It's
seen
good.
that.
To the Wonderwall like EDM version.
Yeah.
I
He
made
was
I
on
made like a
Ellen.
mashup on Twitter
Yeah, he
of
got,
like
like,
that in like another video and it got
$15,000.
viral.
And he gets to
And then
I
my
heard
friend
he
did
had a
one
second
too.
He had a
And
concert
it's
last
like-
night
it's at,
outside
like,
of Walmart.
250,000 retweets.
Yeah, like they made a little stage for
gosh.
him and had DJs.
Yeah, that's like.
It was at a Walmart parking lot.
Honestly though, Walmart's probably clinging on like to this like great branding, like or not branding, but like free marketing basically.
He's performing at his local Walmart.
I know, I saw that. When he said, well, Walmart's the only place in my town, that
so
stuck
many
with
of
me.
them.
I was like, yes, me
There's so
too.
many.
What do they call it? Just yodeling boy?
Yodeling Walmart boy.
It's kind of like how when the Tide Pod challenge was a thing. I feel
Yeah, I
like
wonder if
Tide
they're all the
Loki
same.
was like,
This one's the most flaky.
Actually, there's a bunch of branding to see like how we can fix it.
I know they did like a lot of like the don't eat them advertisements, but still, you have to think like Loki. They're also like, this is kind of like dinner.
No such thing as not.
Yes! I hate my hip dips! Oh my god, I need a haircut so bad. I don't like getting haircuts here. They're kind of skeptical.
We don't have a lot of space. Is it a weird shape?
Where do
So I did my best.
Yeah.
Is this like SpongeBob in German? It's scary as shit.
There's just like this idea of, because I was thinking, oh, like urban decay, it's like motivated, but like, what's more like associated with like growth, like the urban setting, and like it's a lot of like, it's down and on top of like the big rock kind of like vibe and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, like what if we combine like, the like sloping somehow? How we created like I have this idea for like this would be a metric, but then it like yeah, except it would be like and then I think the second kind of this kind of that makes sense. Where the top kind of rounded over and dome like, but it comes to like my so it's like a back into like on the top. Does that make sense? Would we at least and I thought about rolling balls too, but then like I just don't think that consistent shoe will come out. Yeah, consistent will come out. So I think we should do that. And so we're gonna just be like a little yeah. And I'm just gonna try to like do something like not that we can put it in the presentation. Like we're just gonna think that idea. Yeah. Harley. Yeah, anything with an outfit. This is like just like yeah. And I like went in last night and I like added a few slides and stuff like that from the first one. But it was like the one with like the woman, like the high res picture we have the woman sitting on. I added like that one. Shut up. So pricey for like so pricey. Make sure it's like the cosmetic silicone, not like fresh. Pretty sure it's actually probably do. No. I don't think that's how it's
Does it always do all of that kind of
it comes with
like
that, this part, but not this. This is Look at a little wedding too. This is 92 cents per pound. Oh, that's yeah. Silicone. What? Oh, it's so gross.
I have kind of a pricing for like a machine like this.
Yeah, but you don't have that ticket.
That sounds like
Why does it go from 70 to 50?
Sweet. You should go to a wedding. Someone get married.
one of mine like
It's really sweet. I just haven't been to a wedding forever, and it's just I keep seeing all these people post stuff and just wedding things. Yeah, I don't look cute.
I don't like you.
No.
I was like, I don't mind you. And then I talked to her.
So why is it so cautious?
Is she like really into like
Yeah, they're kind of like
It was astonishing.
awesome.
like still has the what do you call it plan? Confederate plan?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I was just like well, like it's all, I didn't think I like to sit then.
It's school, so I don't think
Yeah. Yeah, oh that's true because you don't live in Ohio.
my cousin was like my other cousin was like last year, and it was like it was a Disney.
Ooh. On Tuesday?
Yeah.
That's weird. Yeah. And then for their honeymoon, they went to Disney. Oh, wow. I think I'm like, for my sibling lineup, I'm definitely that. For my cousin lineup on my dad's side, I think one more cousin goes before me. And then, which is kind of weird. And then for my, I don't really talk to my mom's side. I got a sleeping like years ago this year, and I had brought him to the holiday, yeah, doing that. And yeah, it was okay, yeah, I don't know, it was kind of weird, so I'm like, oh, I'm cold now, we just need to do first, Are you on? Where is it?
So the interesting part of this demo didn't happen yet.
This is literally just an add-on my answer. It's the two.
It's noise down.
Big steps.
Yeah, good boy.
There's like, I think there's like, you know, when the hair follicle goes back in its hole. Does that make sense? It like when you, it looks like a pimple that's actually from the hair trying to grow out, and it goes back in its sleeve or something like that. Yeah, I think there's one on my head, and like I can feel it when I do this. I feel like trying to get my hair out. Because usually when I get this all, I like kind of like do like this, and like get the hair out. So annoying.
And like a little
Version 2, yeah. Just 2 years. 38. Where do these numbers come? I don't know. Oh, man.
Your pump CGC. No, I don't think so. Wait, fun.
like, I keep hearing, like, basically how, like, all the people there, like, really research this whole older world, like,
Like, I don't know.
like, stupid.
You ever those, trunk as you fall asleep, things like that?
But it was all about how, like, Facebook posted, like,
Yeah.
that one,
There's just
corporation.
there's all, Well, I think it's like it's such a rapid detail, and also like, yeah, I guess if you're like, if you're kind of it's not the then I guess you look this time, it's not
The trick is like more that you don't ever shoot it with a bunch of viewers.
I guess if you like push up at the edge like that, it's like it's steady with it, but if you're not expecting your drop, then
It's closer than you think. Just think about it. All right, so it's 27% done, right? 23% done.
But the back one's.
Most of the hard stuff is already finished. So my money's on like 5 more.
I mean, I'm fine with that.
I think what I'll do is I'm gonna just keep going with the demo. If you guys need to take off in class, you can. Because we probably won't get to the good stuff until the end of class or shortly after. But I'm just gonna do it. I have time tonight to do the demo. I'm gonna do the demo and try to get everything on.
And then you're never, ever, ever going to delete your YouTube or this video. So we could
I will
always.
probably have to do both first.
Wait, you will? Wait,
Actually,
are you
I'm not
serious?
sure. I'm not sure. This model, I might have to take down within the week.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't build this. Kayla and their team built this. It's a product that's already out there, so it shouldn't be a problem. But I don't want it to become a problem because they sold the company to Boston Johnson and technically it's all their IP.
Can you send us the file so we get it? I mean, you can just.
No. No, you can't have this file. That is like a clear, definite no.
I feel like next year even, the students are probably going to just be watching Will's
Well, the thing
videos.
is, it's not up to me whether I use Johnson & Johnson's stuff that I just released and stuff like that, whether they're like something to do it. I don't think you do with all of them, but if I gave the model out to all of you guys.
Not the model, not the model, I meant like the video.
Oh, the video.
So we can reference it.
You guys can pull it down from YouTube using Clip Grab.
What's that?
It's entirely free. Oh, Clip Grab. Go get Clip Grab now. It's free, it's open source. You can put in any YouTube,
Is that-
Facebook, video URL, and it just takes it down. Which is totally probably illegal, but
Yeah.
you didn't hear from me.
Oh, is this like LimeWire?
No.
We all had
Look,
one.
guys, it's almost done. It's at 40%.
There's an antenna.
Go. Set. I've done
Why are the
some longer.
Fortnite servers down?
Oh, it's finished. Okay. All right, on to the more interesting stuff. All right, for those of you watching at home, that took half an hour.
Oh, that doesn't seem like half an hour. It's like,
Or something like that. It's 6:27 now. Okay, so I'm gonna just save my file again. All right, I'm gonna close out a Keyshot, and let's look at what came out of this. All right, so these are all my rendering files. Wait, what are the PNGs? Oh, that's the Clown Pass. Okay, that's cool. Oh yeah, so Sebastian, that's the Clown Pass. Yeah, and if it's not obvious why that's useful, we're gonna go over why that's useful. Yeah, okay, cool. And I guess what's good to see here is like all of the components came in as different colors. Yeah, it looks like it's showing up that way. All right, so those are the Clown Passes. I believe it threw the clay pass and the chrome pass and the full color pass into the same file. I believe there's a box that you can check that makes sure it puts them in the Photoshop file. Sometimes it kicks out Oh wait, no it didn't. I'm looking at 3 different files here. Just kidding. Alright, so I'm going to open it up in Photoshop. Yeah, I think there's a box that you can check that will put all passes into one Photoshop file so you don't have to do what I'm about to do, which is just add them all to the file. Alright, so I opened up my main color file. Now I'm going to place a bunch of my other images that rendered, so I gotta go find them again. I did put them in here, I think. Demo. Okay, so I want the Chrome pass. Oh cool, and it left the name. So I want the Chrome pass. And I shouldn't have to move it around. Because these all rendered at exactly the same size, it should be fine. I'm going to place these as embedded images. Alright, there's the clay pass. And then I only need probably one of these Chrome passes. Although one of them has the lenses and one doesn't. So we'll use that one and one without the lenses. This one looked kind of cool. Yeah. Okay. So there we go. We have 5 layers, and I'm going to save this as something new. We'll call this just like the working render file. Okay, so that's our baseline, right? And there are some things you can probably see on the screen too that are not perfect. Overall, I'd say this is maybe a little too dark. Like it doesn't look as white as it does in real life, so we're going to lighten it up. And there are a couple little blemishes down here that maybe I want to just get rid of to make it look prettier. Alright, so first things first, I always make a copy of my original rendering and turn the original off. That way, if I mess things up beyond repair, I always have something I can go back to. Okay, so next thing I'll do is I'm going to use this clay pass. So I'm going to make a copy of it, turn off the original, and I'm going to do just an overlay. So this is a type of adjustment layer that you can apply to any one of these things, and you can see before and after sort of what's happening. So a clay pass as an overlay does a really good job of emphasizing the overall volume of a shape. It'll make the darks a little bit darker, the brights a little brighter, and it's not going to blow out any of the highlights. That I think is way too extreme, but I think it does give me a little bit more definition between the inside and the outside of this mask. So like with any layer, you can adjust the opacity and kind of tone it down. So maybe that level of extra definition is pretty good. Actually, I kind of like that. Okay, let's try another adjustment layer. Another one that I usually do, because this is all supposed to be white, I might actually go in and use levels and mess around with this a little bit and just see. Nope, that's gonna blow things out. Okay, with levels you can move. This is like the is it called a histogram? Yeah, you can change the middle point of your light so that if I move this around, you can see how it's going way darker, way lighter. What I'm trying to do is make everything look a little bit whiter. Okay, so one thing it did, this looks a little bit whiter as a whole. It does still have more definition between light and dark than it did before either of these, because I have this what I call it, overlay layer in here. But then I also brightened all of those things up. So before and after, basically I have a little bit more definition and everything looks a little bit more white. However, one thing it did that I didn't like is it kind of blew out this surface. So now we're going to use our Chrome pass. So you can see on, the clown pass. One thing you can do in Photoshop is select a color range. And I'm going to turn this way down, the fuzziness. Oops. Select a color range, and it will let you pick a color and make a selection based on that color, right? So you can kind of see the little marching ants outlining all of the yellow on this part. That's something I got from this clown pass. Alright, why is that important? I could, and let me delete this layer mask. So this here kind of brightened up, you know, the temples of my glasses, and it brightened up the inside, but it also kind of blew out the front. If I do a mask with this selection, and actually I need to do the opposite. So first thing I'm going to do is, right now I have like this area selected, and I want all the opposite of that selected. So now I'm selecting everything except for the front here, and I guess these holes. And I apply that as a layer mask. Now this adjustment only affects, I guess it doesn't affect the front of my mask, which is good because I liked how this highlight looked before that adjustment layer. Does that make sense? Okay. Just one thing you can do with a clown pass is like any of these adjustments, if it does something good for one part of your render, you can keep it and ignore the parts that I guess didn't work so well. So these holes look like they're really dark, and I might actually go into this mask and I can edit it with a brush tool. So like, oops, with a white brush tool I can basically deselect these areas so that they're no longer masked out. Oops, I went a little wide there. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And I think that top edge is a little dark too, so I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, another thing that I noticed it did is I like how yellow these glasses are, but after I did this adjustment, it kind of looks like they're faded. So that might be another area I mask out. So I'm going to find the clown pass that has those glasses. There they are. And I'm going to, same thing, select the color range. That is just the glass. There it is. And there are a couple ways I might do this. I might, let's see. I don't want that selected there. I wonder if I can just subtract it from the selection. Nope, different. Alright, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to my original layer here, and I'm going to do, it's Control J. Alright, what's Control J? It makes a copy of all of the pixels that are selected in a layer. Right, so it's still in my under layer. I just made a copy. I'm going to move this up in front here so that we still have that like dark color. And it kind of looks maybe a little bit too yellow. So with this, I might actually like brighten that up a little bit too, or even change the hue. Like, it looks kind of yellow. I wish it were a little bit more orange, so maybe I'll just like go a little bit more orange, maybe increase its saturation a little bit, kind of making it look just a little bit more aggressive. Right, so it went from kind of washed out to a little bit more aggressive. Okay, and again, these are all like very specific to this rendering, and I know I'm kind of glossing over the exact mouse clicks, but those are things that they'll be in the video. You can kind of go back and see them if you want. All right, who else notices something about this that maybe they would want to change?
The left thing is like too close to the background. Yeah.
Ah, the background. Yeah, and I think originally before these layers the background was a little bit darker. So I'll use my clown pass again to select the background. So the suggestion was made, the background color got a little bit too bright, or it's too close to the color of the glasses temples. In this case, I could do another like adjustment layer. So I could do like a, where is it, brightness, and bring the brightness down of the background, kind of make the rest of this pop a little bit more. Actually, that kind of works. Okay. And because it's an adjustment layer, it's something I can always go back and mess with a little bit more. Alright, so we didn't do anything with the chrome pass. I am kind of curious, so like this has a nice hard highlight on it. I like the highlights on the top here. I think they could be a little bit more pronounced on the edges of these glasses. So I'm going to use my, let's see here, my chrome pass. So I'm going to make a copy of it like normal and turn it on. I'm going to move it up top here just so I know what's happening. So I was talking about like increasing the brightness of some of these highlights on the temples. So first thing I want to do is just select those temples. So I'm going to pick that color range. And sometimes, like if you shift, you can add two color ranges together. So I can pick both of these. Sometimes it will, I don't know, two colors like combine to make a third color, and you'll get weird selections that you don't want. So you might have to do it one at a time. All right, so there's my selection. I'm going to mask it off. Okay, no, I don't want them to be chrome, but I'm going to use this as an adjustment layer. Again, I'm going to do overlay. Overlay basically takes the brightness in the chrome layer and adds it to the brightness of anything below it, and takes any darkness and adds that darkness to the layer below it. And actually, because I don't really care about the darkness, I might do just lighten. It looks like it was about the same. Alright, you see how it's like making these a little bit more shiny? Another thing I can do, like I don't like all of this noise that just appeared, and I actually don't like these highlights over here. In my mask layer, I can get rid of those by using either a black or a white brush to just like paint over part of the mask. So I can just get rid of those things. I don't want that. That just looked bad. And if I use a, like where's my brush? Brush settings. Okay, if I use like a really soft brush with like wider spacing, that is big, like bigger than that. Yeah, I can kind of like fade out some of these highlights so they're not quite as extreme, right? So yeah, I got that highlight back. Okay. So those are some of the things that you can use your like chrome and clay pass for. And I know for some of you guys it's review, good to see it one more time. For some of you it's brand new, which is good too. I'm going to save this. Okay, so another thing you might want to do is change the color or material of something. Those are two good suggestions. You kind of saw how I started to change the color of these lenses. Hue saturation layer is a good way to do that. Like if I wanted these to be kind of like a cool minty green instead. Again, you can kind of mask off an area you want to change the color based on your clown pass, and then use a hue saturation layer to do that. Maybe that's a little too bright. Bring it down a little bit. Okay. Another common thing is to apply a texture. So a big part of applying texture is finding a texture. So usually to find a texture, I just go to YouTube and find like felt texture and go to images. I usually make sure the size of anything I'm looking at is at least 800 pixels big, sometimes even bigger than that. And then you have a bunch of things that you can choose from. Usually that looks pretty cool. I kind of want to see that. Nope, too big. It's subject to copyright. Is it though? Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to save this as... Sure. Texture. Okay. Google is your best friend for finding textures. Save them somewhere you can find them because you can build up a whole library of this kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go back into Photoshop. I'm going to add a layer. That is my texture. Yep, that's exactly what I wanted. And, okay, so what did I want to make felt? Maybe the inside of this mask should be felt so that it has a more premium feel, and if it touches your face, it feels wonderful. I don't know if that makes any sense, but for the sake of this demo, we're going to do that. So, I'm going to bring this up to the top and pick the area that I want to be felt, the blue area. So, once again, make sure you're like on your Clown Class layer, select a color range that you want to apply that texture to, and then you're going to, with that selection, you can kind of barely see the marching ants here. You're going to apply a mask to that. Voila, it's perfect. No. Okay, so there's still some other things that we want to do here. Namely, I've got a section here that looks like it didn't take, so I'm going to go in and actually open up my brush menu one more time and go back to like a hard brush that's not so big and kind of, oops, the other way. Actually, I'm gonna, let's see, step backward, yeah, because I don't want to lose that whole, boom. Sorry, to do what? Oh, nothing. I'm just using the mouse. So, for each layer, I guess I can kind of explain what a mask is. You have, in a normal layer in Photoshop, you have all of your pixels, right? And if you use a brush or a pencil or anything else, it'll just like change the pixels in that layer. And that's how you get things like painting or like making adjustments. Masking is a little bit different. So to any layer, you can apply this thing called a mask. And basically, anything in this mask that is black, it won't, basically it's going to mask it off. It will make those pixels on that layer not appear. And anything in that mask layer that is white will allow the pixels in that layer to appear. So in this case, my entire layer, like if I turn off this layer mask, my entire layer is still that felt. So if I wanted to change something, like it's non-destructive. I can still have this entire layer felt if I need it. But by masking it off, I can limit how many pixels, or like which pixels actually show that felt. Does that make sense? So then what I'm doing to change the mask, originally, like I made a selection and then applied that selection as a mask, which automatically takes that selection and makes it white in the mask layer, and anything outside the selection is black. To edit that, you can click on the little mask over here and use your brush tool and paint in white to like expose more pixels, or you can paint in black to hide more of those pixels. I hope this is making some sense. It's not super intuitive until you've had a chance to like mess around with masks a little bit, but it's a really powerful tool. Okay, so we've got our felt, but it looks really, really flat, right? So anyone have an idea how we might be able to add some of the like volume back to that area that is felt? Do an overlay of what? Yeah, we're gonna overlay the felt with something. What are we gonna use to add that volume back? You could use chrome. It would look shiny. Yeah, the clay pass. Clay pass is right, exactly, like a matte material. So we're going to find that clay pass again. I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to bring it all the way up to the top here, turn it on. What of the clay pass do we want? I want the same mask. So you can actually, I'm going to hold Control, which brings up this little like box tool on my mouse, which you guys can kind of see. It'll let me pick all of the pixels in a mask. and make that same selection. So now I can apply that mask to this layer, right? So it used to be, if I disable that, it used to be the whole thing. I just want that part. And then we're going to apply it, like Ty said, as an overlay. And if we want it to be more extreme, we can do something called hard light. And see how you can start to see some of those like highlights and lowlights again. Alright, it doesn't look like it's there quite enough, so there are a couple things we can do. We can like turn down the opacity of our felt a little bit. No, that doesn't seem to be doing it. Oh, I realized we got rid of our glasses too. We'll have to fix that. We can also, where is our clay layer? Yeah, we can also duplicate that and see if that makes a difference. Let's do, no, that looks gross. You know, we could also try a, where is it? Brightness contrast layer. Increase the contrast a bunch. And then, what's that?
I was to say the felt looks too big.
Yeah, we can do that too. Okay, let me get out of here. The felt looks too big was the comment. So yeah, you can, I'm just gonna disable this mask, get out my selection tool, and like make the felt a lot smaller. It is probably changing, like messing with the mask as well, and that's okay for now because I can always reselect it. Another thing that might help is on this layer, I'm just gonna get rid of that layer mask. On this layer, I might try and like reduce the contrast a little bit so it's not quite as like gritty. Wow, and it doesn't seem like it's doing a ton to that. Let me merge these. And then I'm going to pick that same selection and apply it as a mask. So like we're starting to get there. If I don't like how it looks, because it's still kind of like wiry, I could always go and find another, like a different felt texture to make it a little less extreme. Yeah, it still looks a little dark to me. And it could just be that that is a little extreme, but I like the shadows from that. Maybe I'll do a brighten it up just a little bit. Okay. I think we're starting to get somewhere with that. Another thing I might do, man, and I don't want to keep you guys here forever like I am. Like some of these little details up top here I probably would erase those because they don't need to be, I don't know, those were like plastic features, not felt features. And we need to get those glasses back. So let me find my glasses layer and move it back on top. That's interesting. And actually we have our color on top of that. So these guys should come up top here, but we want to see the felt through them. So I could probably change the opacity a little bit. And then if I want some of the shine back on those goggles, I could use the chrome pass and like add some more of the highlights back. But I think we're getting pretty close. Okay, so that was a lot of layers and a lot of stuff I talked through. Again, there's a video, which is nice. But these are the types of adjustments that if you have in your head that you can make these types of decisions after the fact using Photoshop, awesome. Okay, so there's one other part to this demo. And I know you guys are sticking around late. Thank you so much. I'm going to do a couple things on Sketchbook Pro. So I'm going to actually have to like save this file out and move it to the other computer. So give me a minute.